stay tuned because for the next 60 minutes, Motorsports Unlimited is on the air. Hi, I'm Jerry Bryant, and these are the lovely ladies of motorsports. And all this hour, we're going to have 60 minutes of action-packed excitement. All kinds of exciting things will happen. And we got the famous Bill Wildt, and we got all kinds of other good stuff that's happening all this hour. Motorsports Unlimited, 60 minutes of non-stop action. So let's go to the studio right now, huh?
Thanks, Jerry, and hi, everybody. Welcome to the studio headquarters of Chicagoland's most watched, most talked about Access television series. I'm Bill Wildt, and this is the 1419th edition of Motorsports Unlimited. Today's show is titled Explanation 13 and is the 13th episode in our series within Motorsports Unlimited, meant to explain what Motorsports Unlimited is all about and has been all about for the past 30 plus years. When we ran out of time on the last episode, Explanation 12, I was hammering away at the school system. I was doing this because the school system is a major influence on our culture and I believe is complicit in the destruction of the motorsport community. First, by failing those in the school population who have an interest in mechanical things, and second, by elevating the status of those we compete with in our society. At this point, I don't want to spend any more time to continue with this criticism, but I'm sure I'll get back to it. I just don't want to waste my time badgering these people who aren't really listening anyway, because they are really powerless to do something about their involvement given the power of television. Network television is far and away the largest influence on our culture, including the school system, and the place where I've focused my efforts for the past 30 years. It would have been nice if one or two of the on-the-air personalities had had the decency to recognize what they were doing and the pain they were causing, and perhaps make a noble effort to correct the situation. Sort of wishful thinking, I know, but I'm an optimist and one never knows where or when the next hero may emerge. It didn't happen, but it could have, and I always hope things can be handled with please and thank yous. On the other hand, the truth is, the on-air personalities have very little to do with what's actually on the air. It's well above their pay grade. I've often said I wish I had the resources to dig into the economic structure of the television networks and their connections with Major League Baseball, pro football, pro basketball, and the rest. I'm convinced those who hold the reins of network television also have financial interest in Major League Baseball, pro football, pro basketball, and all the rest. In other words, it's in their best interest to promote these things. To those who say, so what? The so what is, they're using the public airwaves to advance their financial interest, and that wasn't the deal. Those who watch regularly will remember in earlier episodes of Explanation, I explained the basics of the Radio Act of 1927 and the Communications Act of 1934. This legislation that placed America's broadcast communications in the hands of a privileged few was not intended as license to use the public airwaves to advance their personal financial interests at everyone else's expense. Of course, being suspicious of something because of observation of circumstance is quite different from proving foul play. And if we are to succeed in our effort to survive, we must be able to prove our allegations. I say these things as a quote for those who may follow. It's unlikely I will live long enough to see the conclusion of these efforts. I don't mean for that to sound grim. It's just a recognition of reality, considering how long it's taken to achieve even a small amount of progress, if there has been any progress at all. And I'll get into all that as we go along, but first, once again, we have breaking news, as they like to say on commercial television. I experienced something unusual this summer I think I should talk about on the air. Perhaps the best way to do it is to read the thank you note I asked Janine to post on the Motorsports Unlimited Facebook page. That's right, I don't know how to do it. Janine takes care of it completely. Here it is. It's sort of an explanation and a thank you note combined. On June 24th, 2018, I attended Motoblot 2018, at which I received an award as the first inductee into the Motoblot Hall of Fame. Of course, I was taken aback. I can think of a number of people who I would have selected for the honor rather than me. I'm not sure I should even be in the running. I became aware of this event a couple of weeks earlier when my friend Dan Schmidt stopped by my house to explain it to me. I wasn't exactly sure what it was all about, but it sounded like a good thing, and Dan was familiar with Motoblot, and we'd been friends for more than 40 years, so I agreed. I didn't hear from him for a couple of weeks, and I still didn't know where I was supposed to be or when I noticed it was June 20th. I remembered I was supposed to be somewhere on June 24th, but I still didn't know where or when. I sent Dan an email indicating I needed more information in order to participate. Dan responded with an email indicating they would pick me and Janine up with a limo from A-Top Limo between 2 p.m. and 2:30 p.m., and the limo would take us to the event. This was the first I knew Janine was involved. It made sense. Janine has been an important part of Motorsports Unlimited for years. For those who don't know, I've been laid up for about 3 years, and while I can drive, I welcome the idea of being picked up. Little did I know until I arrived, the event was something of a large block party about me. Of course, I was honored, flattered, and a little bit embarrassed. Somehow, those who put this event together had rounded up a number of my old friends I haven't seen in some time. It was very enjoyable chatting with folks I haven't seen, in some cases, for years. Even Mayor Barrett Peterson from Franklin Park and Mayor Alan Novacek from Willow Springs attended. They were there in the morning, and I missed them. I'm so sorry, guys. As far as I know, I was where I was supposed to be when I was supposed to be there. Later, I would learn Toby Ristow, the J.C. Whitney store manager, and Doc Joe, that's Dr. Joseph Sadowski, a real MD and the Chicagoland Toys for Tots Motorcycle Parade official doctor and my personal physician for more than 20 years. They were apparently there in the morning, too. Again, my apologies. I didn't know. I'm not sure if I missed anyone else in the morning. When I arrived, the first person I had a chance to chat with was Chicago Wise Guys star Dennis Furcus. Speaking of stars, I was also met by motorcycle racer Timmy Farrell, 42P, one less than 43P, that would be me. I don't think I've seen Timmy since our motorcycle ice racing days 30 years ago when he was the worst nightmare for us veteran racers. A talented young kid weighing 50 pounds less than any of us old dogs and blistering fast. You can imagine my surprise when he introduced me to his teenage son, who is the spitting image of his father. It's hard to believe. Timmy is a grown man now, with a son. I guess I'll have to stop calling him Timmy. There are really too many people to name everyone. I noticed a number of pictures Janine must have printed. She's the only one who had them. She anticipated I'd be signing them, and as is her way, she was prepared. In addition to Janine, there was Samantha Bentley, one-time motorsport girl and later Motorsports Unlimited announcer. And Route 66 car show organizer, a much slimmed-down Ben O'Sayer and his gorgeous wife. My longtime neighbor and snowmobiler, Rich, and his wife, Sharon. Then it was another Chicago Wise Guy star, Joe Bratke. I was saddened to learn he isn't racing anymore. I say saddened, but I really don't mean it. These guys worry me. They're going way too fast with full-size cars. In the quarter mile with 200-mile-an-hour runs, almost commonplace. I guess it's my age, but I remember the Chiseler and Guzzler, these are top fuel dragsters in the 60s, making the first 200-mile-an-hour passes at the old Oswego drag strip. I have a hard time getting my head around door slammers doing these numbers. After a lifetime in motorsport, I've lost too many friends, and I hold my breath every time I see the Chicago Wise Guys called to the line. I still remember Vince Patera's 55 Chevy doing an endo at speed, his engine separated from the car and landing more than 100 yards from the car. Vince said he was all right, but he was on crutches for months. These are all good guys, and I don't want to see any of them getting hurt, so I say I'm saddened to learn Joe isn't racing anymore, and apparently hasn't been racing for a few years. I breathed something of a sigh of relief. Oh yes, then Ken Moore from Naperville was there. Ken is a man who stood up and was counted when it came to public access cable television. Oh, and Chuck Itzenthaler, who brought his exquisite 1,000-horsepower turbocharged stroked Corvette-powered Fiero, entirely built by Chuck, longtime Motorsports Unlimited cameraman. Then there was ABC, the ABC Auto Parts gang. They emerged, including the pretty one. I was delighted to see them all. ABC has been Motorsports Unlimited's longest supporter, and I haven't been there to see them since I've been laid up. I hope they forgive me. It's not a lack of manners, it's my back, and I suppose old age. I really have to do better. There was more, but I couldn't have been more touched by the number of people who went out of their way to see me receive this honor. I must admit, on my way home, again in the A-top limo, I found myself wondering how I might stay in touch with people better while I'm laid up. It was good for me to be with these people. I keep hoping I'm going to get better, but it's been 3 years. This is about as far as I got with what I hoped would turn out to be a thank you note. When a couple of weeks later, I was still working on it, I received a call from Dan Schmidt again. He said they wanted to buy me dinner and present me with a jacket that had somehow been forgotten during the presentation ceremony. I remembered Dan did mention a jacket the time he stopped by to invite me to the Motoblot ceremony. I told him it really wasn't necessary to buy me dinner, just drop it off the next time you're out my way. Dan was insistent and said they wanted to do it that way. The place wasn't that far, so I agreed. As it turned out, it was a very nice place and very popular. The closest parking place I could find was a handicap spot about a block and a half away. Yes, I spent some time driving up and down the side streets, trying to get a closer parking place, but all had signs indicating permit parking only. As I said, the place was apparently very popular, and I assumed the signs were to protect the residential property owners' parking places. Anyway, I started hobbling with my walker, and it's so embarrassing, back to the entrance of the restaurant. During the hobbling, I had time to look over the sign on the place. Dan had given me the name and address, but he speaks with a Chicago accent. I know there is no such thing, but whatever it is, Dan has it. A little like the original mayor, Richard J. Daley. He told me the place was called Paisanos. Say it with sort of a Brooklyn accent and you'll have it about right. It was actually Paisans. I realized then I'd heard of the place and it was way out of my price range. There was no turning back now. I didn't think I could get all the way back to my car. I was running out of steam. Plus, Dan said they were buying, so I went in. I found my way to the table and was surprised to see the number of people there, including Cooch, Janine, George Gora, Andy Stemps, Dan Schmidt, and his wife Joyce, and others. It was sort of an odd gathering, I thought, but this whole thing was odd and confusing. When I attended the Motoblot Hall of Fame ceremony, Dan Schmidt was sitting there displaying a fine example of a Bultaco Astro short tracker. That's a motorcycle from our era. That might not mean much to anyone else, but Dan is an OSA guy, and I'm a Bultaco guy. OSA and Bultaco were both Spanish motorcycle companies when we were racing, a little like Ford and Chevy. Some people were Bultaco people, and some people were OSA people. You can imagine my surprise when I saw him displaying a Bultaco. I wondered if he'd gone over to the dark side. I couldn't pay much attention to it because I was chatting with old friends at the Motoblot ceremony. Once again, tonight, I found myself chatting with old friends, and just as had been at the Motoblot ceremony, Cooch was rapping away. He had a number of door prizes, hats, banners, stickers, etc. He'd handed out ticket stubs and was encouraging everyone at the table to check their stubs. I've covered many biker events in which Cooch took the stage and rambled on about door prizes and games. For me, it has become sort of background noise at a biker event. One doesn't pay much attention to it, but the event would be empty without it. It was actually a pleasant evening, and it felt good to chat with people I really hadn't seen since I've been laid up. And the food was good. Somehow, as Cooch was rolling around like a campaign-shouting Southern diplomat, to paraphrase Chuck Berry, he must have called my name. A couple of people were yelling at me to check your ticket stub. Oh yeah, that's me, I said. Cooch handed me an envelope. This was quite different than the other door prizes he'd been handing out. Someone yelled, "Look inside." I opened the envelope and found a cashier's check for $3,785 made out to me. I was stunned. What's this about? Little by little, I got the story. Apparently, the Motoblot Hall of Fame event was a fundraiser for me. I didn't know. I promise you, I didn't know, or I would have put a stop to it. I mean, I can think of a number of people in greater need than me. It is true, things have been a little tough since I've been laid up, and I've always been quite open about my financial situation, perhaps more than I should have been. I get by on an $847 a month Social Security check, but I do get by. I make it public in part to explain the slow action of Motorsports Unlimited since I've been laid up. I talked to Janine about the possibility of returning the money. Apparently that isn't possible. In addition, she had a couple of $100 in cash she somehow collected for me. That's close to $4,000. Real money. This couldn't be more difficult for me. On the one hand, I'm flattered and appreciate the fact that so many people think well of me. On the other, I just don't know what to think about this. Certainly a thank you note is called for, but I must admit I don't like being on the receiving end of something like this. I much prefer to be on the other end. Although it has been something of a lesson for me on how to behave on the giving end, with empathy for the awkward position the recipient finds themselves, I learned something. I wouldn't be mentioning any of this except I've had a couple of inquiries about this from people wondering if I got the money, because I haven't mentioned it. Yes, I received the money and am pondering the best way to use it to advance the cause I've been working on for some 31 years. For example, raising public consciousness, understanding and appreciation of the motorsport community and its activities. Believe it or not, this is difficult for me. I don't mind spending my own money for something I believe in, but spending someone else's money brings a different kind of responsibility. I've often said in many ways I am the perfect person to do this kind of work in that I've been a participant in every kind of motorsport at every level. For example, for racer, builder, organizer, from motorcycles to cars to boats to aircraft to snowmobiles at all. But I do have a flaw. I am not a fundraiser. I don't like doing it or even talking about it. Unfortunately, I wasn't born with personal wealth, so the resources I have are what I have to work with, and they are meager. If I were born independently wealthy, I wouldn't hesitate to spend everything I had on what I believe in. But spending some other people's money on what I believe in is something I have a problem with. Unfortunately, that means I can't really accomplish what needs to be accomplished. Intellectually, I know I'm going to need the resources of others, but emotionally, I'm really not equipped for it. I suppose expressing all of this isn't really necessary, but I feel the need to explain my feelings. I guess I feel okay with it by considering it a donation to continue my work on Motorsports Unlimited. As for this thank you note, finding a way to express appreciation and accepting the good wishes of folks who apparently like what I do, while at the same time expressing my discomfort, requires a better writer than me. If it makes anyone feel better and explains the length of time it's taken to craft this thank you note, please understand. Arthritis has literally crippled my hands so I can no longer write things in longhand. I typed every letter of this note using only one finger of my right hand. It takes me forever because my back only allows 15 to 20 minutes at a time at the computer. So, 15 minutes at a time, day after day, week after week, I've struggled to find the words to say thank you without stumbling over my discomfort. It would appear this is the best I can do. And if I wait any longer to give it to Janine for posting on the Motorsports Unlimited Facebook page, no one will remember what I'm thanking them for. And I do thank everyone. I am truly touched and wish I could express my feelings better. So that's pretty much what happened. I'm still not sure about the details. You know, like who put it together, whose idea. I guess it isn't really important, but I'm the curious type and I can't really leave things alone. From what I gather, it seems it was sort of a combined effort between Cooch, George Gora, Andy Stemps, Janine, and somehow Dan Schmidt must have been in there somewhere. I'm still not sure, but everyone went through a lot of effort. I wonder if they think I'm dying. I've actually had several calls about that. I'm not. I mean, technically, we're all dying, but I'm not planning on going anytime soon. Hopefully, everyone won't be disappointed. It's true I can't walk very well and my hands are crippled with arthritis, but rumors of my death are premature, I assure you. I still have work to do, and speaking of work, it's time to get back to it. I've spent quite a bit of time recently trashing the school system and their complicity in what has happened to the motorsport community, and while I certainly have to mention it, because it's important, and I'm going to get back to it, but I want to get back to the story of Motorsports Unlimited. When I was receiving the honor at the Motoblot event, I mentioned I was embarrassed to be inducted into something called a Hall of Fame when I've been such a miserable failure. It didn't seem right to me, and I think the folks there thought I was kidding. I wasn't kidding, and I'm going to explain why I feel that way by getting back to the story of the history and the progress of Motorsports Unlimited over the past 30 plus years. One more thing before I leave the Motoblot story. As I understand it, every year they are going to select a new inductee into the Hall of Fame, and the honoree of the previous year has the honor of announcing next year's inductee. If I have it right, I'm looking forward to it. I'll be interested in seeing what kind of company I'll be in. Now, it's been so long since I was talking about the actual history and development of Motorsports Unlimited, I'm going to have to go back and review what I've already covered. I know I went through the great cable wars and the struggle to save public access cable, as well as motorsport, but I'm not exactly sure where I left off. I think I was about to talk about my limited success with the track owners, but let me take a moment to look through some previous episodes of Motorsports Unlimited involving this explanation to make sure I don't leave anything out. I'll be right back. Well, that was more difficult than I thought. It seems I have strayed off topic significantly. I think it's time to talk about our efforts to include the local track owners in our effort to raise public consciousness, understanding, and appreciation of the motorsport community and its activities. When I began this effort, I had several goals in mind. Some were simple and basic, some more complex, like taking on the school system or taking them to task. One has to remember, this was more than 30 years ago. There was no cable television, and there was no motorsport on television. I felt it was important to teach the public the word motorsport. It probably seems obvious now, but it wasn't obvious at the time. People didn't talk about motorsport or think about it. Worse, they didn't even know about it. I mean, how could they? It wasn't included in network television sports news or part of the school system. It would be virtually impossible for the public to be aware of how many people participated in this important activity. It was the province of the hardcore gearheads struggling in obscurity. An obscurity that was a slow-motion death march. After becoming aware of the public access cable TV opportunity, I knew what I had to do. Get my community on television. If you've been watching this explanation series within Motorsports Unlimited, you know all this, along with some of the struggles I had to deal with to make it happen. In addition to teaching people the word motorsport, I was determined to save the local racetracks. I considered the local racetracks the backbone of motorsport, and their survival was essential to our survival. It seemed to me the track operators would jump at the opportunity to get their tracks and their stories on the air. With one notable exception, it didn't really turn out that way. First, I should explain. I was eventually forced to start charging for taping shows. I didn't want to because I was aware the people I was trying to get on the air were already in poor financial shape, or there really wouldn't have been any need for my work. The last thing they needed was another financial burden. Still, I didn't have a choice. Producing a television series costs money, even if you get the video equipment for free, get to learn how to use the video equipment for free, and get to get your material aired for free. Those things, I quickly learned, were only the beginning. My efforts towards fundraising proved to be almost completely ineffective, and to some degree, I understood it. I thought it was important that we looked credible on the air if we were going to have the influence I hoped. From the beginning, I always wore a jacket and tie, and the girls always looked well turned out. No one on the show looked ragamuffin. For the studio shows, I paid a great deal of attention to how attractive the set looked. More about this later. The studio work was an ordeal in and of itself. Anyway, my efforts to make us look successful so we would be taken seriously eliminated a pity factor. Few people watching ever knew we were continually hanging on by our fingertips financially. But that was indeed the case. So, my hopes of funding this effort with $10 and $20 donations from thousands of enthusiastic motorsport people never materialized. I was stuck. The underwriting acknowledgments at the end of the show were helpful, but fell far short of providing adequate funding. With donations almost non-existent, I had to come up with a new plan or cease operations. I just couldn't afford it. As we struggled along, I became aware I was getting calls from would-be car show promoters asking us to cover their proposed events. Frankly, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. Once a car show is held, it's over. The best we could do was get the show on the air within 3 weeks of shooting. That really doesn't help the show succeed because the show was over when our coverage aired. It seemed to me would be far more valuable to the racetracks because they were trying to sell tickets week after week, month after month. Having a presence on TV should be a great help to them. As time went along, I finally decided, more or less out of desperation, to charge a couple of $100s to go to the activity and tape a show. In the beginning, I went through great effort to explain the charge was a donation, not a charge, which no one understood. All they wanted to know was how much. When I began doing this, I learned something interesting. When people paid for us to be there, they bent over backwards to cooperate and provide us with what we needed to produce the show. I was fond of saying, I can only do as good a show as you'll let me. I really found it peculiar that people were so much more cooperative when they had a little money involved. Skin in the game, I suppose. One would think it would be the other way around. One would think people would be so appreciative that we were spending our own money to promote their activity, they would show it with cooperation. For some reason, it works the other way around. I wasn't the only one who noticed it. Chris asked me if I noticed it too. I did. Human nature can be odd indeed. Anyway, people didn't seem to mind kicking in a few bucks to make it happen, so I felt we were onto something that would keep us afloat, at least for a while. My plan was to visit each of the local racetracks 2 or 3 times a year to check out what was going on, update the audience on the point standings, and explain any of the ongoing stories and rivalries. We had a number of local racetracks still operating back then. O'Hare Stadium had shut down, but we still had Santa Fe Speedway, Raceway Park, Ileana Speedway, Kankakee Speedway, and Lake Geneva Raceway. While 2 of the 3 drag strips had closed, US 30 and Oswego, we still had the Grove. Perhaps I should use its proper name, Great Lakes Dragway in Union Grove, Wisconsin. So I had plenty of tracks to work with. I felt I could fill in any blank spaces in our weekly program ambition with car shows. At the time, there were only a few outdoor summer car shows a season. Oh, by the way, I just mentioned weekly program ambition. I know I mentioned it earlier in this series, but it bears repeating. Part of my strategy for competing for audience with network television was producing a new show every week. You know, so that when they were airing reruns, people might give us a try if we had fresh material every week. Anyway, as I recall, the first track operator I contacted was Broadway Bob at Great Lakes Dragway. Bob has since passed away, so out of respect, I think I should use his real name, Bob Metzler. Although, truth be told, I know he preferred Broadway Bob. One of the reasons I contacted him first was his reputation as a genuine promoter. He didn't just own the track. He kept it alive with interesting stunts and promotions. I felt he would be the most understanding of our motorsport girls and the way we communicate motorsport to the general public. I was right. He welcomed us with open arms and really appreciated the way we attracted attention to Great Lakes Dragway. Let me stay with Broadway Bob for a moment. Broadway Bob was known as a sharp businessman and tight with a buck, so I was a little surprised he didn't object to the cost. I was really concerned about it. I mean, when I was younger and still racing, well, I actually think I'm still racing, but I guess it's not really true, except in my imagination. Anyway, I watched the other 2 drag strips close over the years, and I was trying to bring attention to all tracks so they could survive financially. The last thing I wanted to do was add cost to their operation, and I wouldn't have blamed him if he looked at me and said, "Are you crazy? I'm barely holding on by my fingertips." I actually sort of expected this, but I was desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. I'd already produced a couple of shows at the Grove at my expense, so he knew we were legitimate. He didn't object to kicking in a few bucks. Of course, over the years, we had to keep upping the price every couple of years. Costs increased, and I was determined to produce something with quality, at least as much quality as we could muster at our level. We weren't network, and we knew it, but we did have to do the best we could, and part of it was my fault. For example, the girls' costumes. I always wanted hot pink and white, but I couldn't find these colors in off-the-shelf outfits. I kept my eyes open and eventually found an elderly German woman, Mrs. Lauernick, who was an incredibly talented seamstress. She was able to make the outfits from scratch. I immediately started looking for material. Damn if I didn't find exactly what I was looking for. At $150 a yard. Yikes. There were lots of complications too. The material was silky and stretchy and very difficult to work with. Still, we'd been using the red and yellow off-the-shelf costumes for a few years, and they were in need of replacement, and the hot pink and white was a terrific upgrade. Could I have done it cheaper? I suppose, but I really liked the improvement. As I said, I suppose some of the cost increase was my fault, and this was only a small part. I'll get into that later. Anyway, back to Broadway Bob. Surprisingly, he never objected to price increases. I held it down as much as I could, and frankly, I didn't have much to do with paying the bills, so I really didn't feel the pressure. Chris always took care of that. I never paid a bill in my life until Chris passed away. I can now tell you how long it takes until they turn off the electricity and gas. 2 months. Boy, was I mad. And boy, did the electric company and gas company not care how angry I was. Apparently, I mentioned this dilemma on the air, and I received a call from a woman who was a bookkeeper, Sue Cassanda, who volunteered to come to my house every couple of months and take care of paying my bills. I mean, I had to provide the money, of course, but this was a big help. This worked out very well for a couple of years, as I recall. Then something happened and she couldn't do it anymore. Just in the nick of time, Janine Lauschat jumped in and said she would do it. I don't know why girls are good at this, but they are. Sue is a bookkeeper at work and very good at it, and Janine always did office work and is quite a businesswoman, more than me, that's for sure. Anyway, I'm fond of saying these two women kept me out of jail. I'm terrible at paperwork, and I know it. I also know how important it is and was grateful for the help. They seemed to be able to breeze through the bewildering paperwork as easily as I could analyze an engine melody. It all seems to make perfect sense to them as engines do to me. Oh yeah, Broadway Bob, Broadway Bob. Yeah. As I got to know him, I realized the reason he didn't object to paying was he bought television time. He knew what it should cost, and getting his track on the air for an hour for far less than a 30-second spot used to cost him was a real bargain from his perspective. In addition, our Motorsport girls added to his show. Again, Broadway Bob was used to paying for attractions to draw an audience, and when we were there taping, it was obvious the audience enjoyed the girls. They sure weren't crowding around us to watch us conduct interviews to look at me. As always, nothing attracts attention like a pretty girl. Oh yeah, as time went by and Broadway Bob began getting feedback, he realized the shows we produced at Great Lakes Dragway continued airing somewhere for about 4 years. It wasn't just a one-time spot like the commercials he was buying. Motorsports Unlimited was pure gold for him. Once he understood what I was doing, he wanted all he could get. In fact, he would have had us taping there every week if I would have allowed it. But that wasn't what I was trying to accomplish. After 20 years or so, the price had worked its way up to $600, and he still wanted us there every week. The conversation every year went something like this. Bob, I can't give you every week, because then we would become the Great Lakes Dragaway show, and that wouldn't serve your interests or mine. I'm trying to show the general public the depth and breadth of the motorsport community. I want to include oval tracks, road race tracks, dirt tracks, pavement, boats, airplanes, snowmobiles, everything and everybody involved in motorsports, not just drag racing. I want the public to become familiar with who we are, what we do, why we do it, and why it's important. I believe tolerance comes through understanding, and we can't expect the public to be tolerant if we don't take the time to explain ourselves to them. I would hope, in the end, folks would come to like us a little bit. I'm pretty sure he understood. He was no fool. But his first interest was promoting his track. I made this speech or something like it to Broadway Bob every year for nearly 2 decades. He would listen and then say, "How many can I have?" To which I would say, 10, which he would grudgingly accept. As I said, he sort of understood my mission, but he really wanted more dates. It was like a game with us. These conversations would usually take place on the phone in November when he would call me to book shows for the following year. I never let him succeed pushing me for more dates, which he tried every year, because I learned over the years, sometime in January or February, the following year, he would call and insist, I just got to give him at least 2 more dates. He always had a good argument. Listen to who I just booked, Bill. You've got to cover these guys. Broadway Bob was such a character. Charming, really. You just couldn't get annoyed with him. And frankly, usually in January or February, we were starving and running on fumes. More about this later. And I generally yielded and gave him a couple of more dates. I really admired his determination to promote his facility. Let me stay with Broadway Bob for just a few more minutes. More than anyone, he was responsible for keeping Great Lakes Dragway in Union Grove, Wisconsin, better known as The Grove, open for more than 40 years, while the other 2 drag strips serving the Chicagoland area, Oswego and US 30, failed to survive. This happened in no small measure because of Broadway Bob's relentless, determined promoting. He was quite a guy. An example of his non-stop promotion was the day we showed up to shoot a program at the Grove. I think it was the one I titled The Little Guys. You know, it was about the regular folks that make up the vast majority of drag racing. They're not the big stars who draw the crowds, but they're the folks who fill the pits and keep the enthusiasm for the big stars going. And not to mention, among them will be the future big stars. Anyway, as was my habit when we arrived, I looked for Broadway Bob to do an interview with him and start the show. Bob was good on camera, and as long as I kept him away from a commercial pitch, which is prohibited on public access cable television, he was always a good interview, and he was always there. On this occasion, he wasn't there. I was truly surprised. I knew he liked being on camera, and he booked us to be there that day, so it was a surprise he wasn't there. I made inquiries. Oh, Bob's at a bike blessing. I'm not a religious person, so I had to ask what that was. You know, the bikers pull up to a priest on their bike, the priest says a few words, sprinkles a little holy water on the bike and the rider, who then moves on and another pulls up to repeat the routine. There were probably thousands of bikes there. I thought, for a moment, trying to, picture the scene. Then it occurred to me, what does Broadway Bob have to do with that? Thinking maybe he rode a bike and was getting blessed too. No, he stands next to the priest while the priest is doing the blessing and then hands the biker a Great Lakes Dragway pamphlet as the biker departs. As I said, Broadway Bob was a relentless promoter, and I guess the thought of thousands of bikers was too juicy of a target to ignore. It wasn't unusual for Broadway Bob to personally take care of the nuts and bolts of promotion. I can't tell you the number of times we covered a car show at McCormick Place on the Chicago lakefront in the winter. Of course, the drag strip was closed most of the winter, but Broadway Bob himself would be standing at the top of the escalator at the car show entrance, handing out Great Lakes Dragway brochures. He didn't leave these details to staff, although they were there too. He personally handed much of the material out himself and was quick to tell me he was available for an interview. He never stopped promoting. Broadway Bob gave me one of the all-time best interview responses. I've been sort of wanting to nail him on something. Like everyone else in the Chicago area, I received numerous Great Lakes Dragway mailings. These were promotions to let people know who and what was going to be at the Grove. Frequently, he advertised jet rockets. Now, I'm a technical guy. There is a distinct technical difference between a jet and a rocket. A jet rocket isn't technically possible unless someone invented something I don't know about. By now, I knew Broadway Bob well enough to tease him on camera, and I really did want to correct this technical mistake in his advertising. Toward the end of an interview, I brought it up, including having one of the offending brochures in my hand. Bob, I began, you advertised jet rockets. A jet is an air-breathing device. A rocket doesn't consume outside air, it carries its own air. A vehicle can be a jet or a rocket, but it can't be a jet rocket. What say you? Without missing a beat, he turned to the camera and proclaimed, only a Great Lakes Dragway. He stopped me cold. He didn't even hesitate. He wasn't a mechanic. He wasn't technical, but he sure was a promoter. It just occurred to me, again, because of the internet and YouTube, someone may be watching this who is not familiar with the Chicago area. Assuming that to be true, I should take just a moment to explain the track availability in this area. Chicago is a big city and very spread out. Those of us who live here in this area will generally say Chicago area or Chicagoland, because some suburbs have actually been absorbed into the city of Chicago. Oh, not officially, but from a practical standpoint. Chicago proper does not have any racetracks anymore, and the ones they did have were temporary or failed to survive very long in a rapidly expanding city. At one time, Soldier Field, this is a beautiful facility in the Chicago lakefront that has become sort of the home of the Chicago Bears football team. It wasn't always, and back in the 50s, they had many auto races in Soldier Field. In many ways, it was an ideal venue for auto racing, but it wasn't designed, built, or intended for that purpose. It was, however, within the city limits of Chicago. I suppose I should also mention the old Chicago Amphitheater. It was a large indoor arena in Chicago on the south side in which they had short indoor drag races for a limited period of time. Perhaps more important, they held some of the best go-kart races I've ever seen. The arena was really too small for drag races, but the thing was ideally sized for go-kart races. The Chicago Amphitheater doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down a long time ago. Today, there are no racetracks in the city of Chicago, and there haven't been for a long time. Sort of strange considering Chicago is the birthplace of auto racing in America, having hosted America's first auto race on Thanksgiving Day, 1895. The good news is, because of the sprawling nature of Chicagoland, we actually do have racetracks, or at least we did have them. Of course, as everyone has seen in pictures, downtown Chicago is loaded with magnificent skyscrapers and dense population. What isn't so easily seen is outside of downtown. Chicago is very spread out. Chicago is physically constrained going east by Lake Michigan. In fact, downtown Chicago is located on the shore of Lake Michigan. That is not the case going north, west, or south. There are no physical constraints in those directions, and Chicago, over the years, has spread out in those three directions. So much so, one could easily start walking from downtown Chicago going north, west, or south and pass through many suburbs without knowing you were no longer in Chicago. They all sort of blend together, and we affectionately call it Chicagoland. I find it interesting that the population of Chicago proper is roughly 3 million people. Yet, the population of the greater Chicagoland area is roughly between 8 and 10 million people, depending on how you establish the borders. The point is, more Chicagoans live outside of the official city of Chicago limits than live inside of them. By the way, the walk I mentioned would be a long one. Chicago is very spread out. The longest street being Western Avenue, and it's roughly 27 miles long. That's 43 kilometers for those outside of the USA. So you could walk 27 miles or 43 kilometers and still be within the Chicago city limits. That's not all. There are constant arguments about which street is truly the longest, notably Halstead Avenue, Harlem Avenue, and Cicero Avenue. Not really important except to a few. The point is, Chicago is physically big, but despite its size, we have no racetracks inside the city limits. So one must go outside of Chicago, technically, to get to a racetrack, although it still feels like Chicago. My first oval track experience was O'Hare Stadium, located a couple of miles south of O'Hare Airport. While we considered it Chicagoland, it was actually located in Schiller Park, a suburb west of Chicago. It was a paved, banked, quarter-mile oval with excellent proportions and banking, making overtaking, even with big American stock cars, a regular occurrence. O'Hare Stadium closed in 1968. I miss it. It was a good track and close. Oh yeah, I've wandered off topic again. Come on, I'm old. It'll eventually happen to you too. I was talking about my efforts to save motorsport by getting us on television via the public access cable opportunity. More specifically, I was talking about my efforts to fund it. I just finished talking about my success with Great Lakes Dragway in Union Grove, Wisconsin. Now, I'm sure those who know me would suspect my next effort would be Santa Fe Speedway. After all, I raced motorcycles there every Wednesday night for 5 years, and they were some of the most enjoyable years of my life. Santa Fe was primarily a clay-banked quarter-mile oval. I say primarily because the track was expandable to nearly a half-mile oval, and for special events, reconfigured for TT racing. I loved the track and usually did well there, and I was concerned about its survival because of encroaching civilization. It didn't take a genius to recognize wealthy people were moving into the area, and I feared their tolerance of the noise and dust would be short-lived. I really wanted to bring this track and the people who raced there to the attention of the general public. But I never did. You see, I was good friends with Jan Gabriel. I mentioned him before. He had a network television series titled The Superchargers for more than a decade. He also did lots of radio commercials, many of which, if you're old enough, you may remember. They went something like this. Sunday, Sunday, Sunday at beautiful US 30 drag strips where the great ones run, run, run. I can't do it like Jan, so apologies to my old friend Jan. He passed away years ago. Anyway, in addition to everything else, including being one of the announcers at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for their Indy 500 television broadcasts, he had a great announcer's voice. He was the announcer at Santa Fe Speedway for many years. That's actually where I got to know him. I was racing motorcycles there, and he was the announcer in the booth doing the call. Anyway, after my success acquiring a funding arrangement at Great Lakes Dragway, I talked to Jan about approaching Howard Teat, the owner of Santa Fe Speedway, about a similar arrangement at Santa Fe Speedway. Jan knew Howard well. Don't even bother, Bill. He won't go for it. I'm sure he won't even let you come in and tape on your own dime. It seems Howard had an almost irrational fear of being sued and felt recording of his races would somehow be a danger to him. As well as Jan knew him, and Jan had a network television series, it took years for Howard to allow Jan to bring his camera crew in to tape a race at Santa Fe Speedway, and he only allowed it once, after which he had a long talk with Jan about not wanting anything taped at Santa Fe Speedway. According to Jan, he was adamant about it. It was really too bad. I'm not a track owner, and while I see nothing but good things about raising public consciousness, understanding, and appreciation of motorsport, I might feel differently if I were a track owner being sued. I don't know. But I respected his position as Jan presented it, and in the back of my mind I thought he may rethink this if he sees Motorsports Unlimited becoming popular, and we were indeed becoming popular. For now, I had other work to do. Next on the list was Raceway Park, advertised in Blue Island, Illinois, but really in Calumet Park, Illinois. Don't ask. I don't know why. Raceway Park was very important to me because it was the closest track to the Chicago border. One could stand in the top row of the stands and look north and see the traffic light marking the south border of the city of Chicago. It was a track I didn't want to lose. One could easily reach it by the CTA, that's the Chicago Transit Authority, meaning public transportation. I really felt this feature made Raceway Park viable, but people had to know about it, and that's where I thought Motorsports Unlimited would come in. I made an appointment with Pete Jennen, the owner of Raceway Park, and went there to make my case. I was a little bit familiar with Raceway Park because I raced 440 cars there several times. It was a tight little, slightly banked, paved, 1/5 mile oval, often advertised as a quarter mile. It wasn't. On the other hand, it was a difficult, challenging, demanding little track that had you on your toes every second. It wasn't easy or like racing around a pitcher's mound as I initially assessed the first time I raced there. The track promptly slapped me silly until I gave it the respect every track demands. After my first unsuccessful practice laps, I grew to enjoy this unique facility. But now, I was there in a different role. I was there, in my mind, to save the place. As much as I liked Raceway Park, one could not ignore the broken down nature of everything. Peeling paint, shabby facilities. The track had spectator stands featuring bleacher seating on both the front stretch and the back stretch of the track. The backstretch stands had been condemned many years ago and were apparently waiting to be torn down, which didn't happen. What pavement there was in the pit area was full of holes to the point where the holes were the pit area. I found all of this the result of Motorsports' omission from network television sports news. It wasn't just Raceway Park that had fallen into disrepair. In fact, Raceway Park was just another example of what had happened to us. Looking at the poor and criticizing their appearance is just plain mean. I was there with a plan to turn things around. Yes, there was some cost involved, but very little, and a real possibility to compete for audience, where all of the money at a racetrack comes from. I mean, one couldn't possibly hope to sell tickets to something folks didn't know existed. That was the part I was in a position to change, but I couldn't do it by myself. I could do most of it, but I couldn't do it all of it. All it was going to take was a little financial help. Pete Jennen was easily 20 years my senior. His office reflected the hard times his track had been caught in. I introduced myself and looked for any sign of recognition. And he didn't show any. I gave him my pitch, I explained public access cable television, and he gave me a bit of history. About 20 or 30 years earlier, a low-powered television operation had come to his track and put it on television. I was aware of it. It was called UHF and went nowhere. They had no money or resources, and what they put on television wasn't really watchable. Apparently they paid Pete to come to his track. At least that's what he said. I don't know. I don't know if it was true or not. I wasn't there to negotiate. I was offering a genuine opportunity to feature Raceway Park on a television program people were watching and talking about. Yes, it was going to cost a couple of $100, but that really isn't much money. I wasn't trying to build a business. I was on a mission trying to figure out how to get gas money to bring the Motorsports Unlimited crew to Raceway Park. Actually, I understood his position completely and agreed with him. A television station should be coming to his facility and offering him money. But they weren't coming and haven't been for decades. They should be, and I wish they were, but they're not. I found this public access cable television opportunity and saw it as a way to get my community on television. It was probably our age difference because I didn't sense that he realized motorsport could not continue to exist if we didn't have the same television presence as those we compete with for public attention. For example, baseball, football, and basketball. At my age, I saw television change America in every way, and from my perspective, no competitor in the sports entertainment marketplace could survive if those they compete with have a television presence and they don't. I could see it clearly, and I knew television wasn't going to go away. Perhaps from his perspective, television was a newfangled thing that could be gone tomorrow, a fad. I'm not really sure, I can't read minds. I didn't think it was going to go anywhere, and to be honest, I think Pete had been drinking. Not that I'm against drinking, but it took on greater importance when you realized the future of Raceway Park was in his hands. As I was leaving, I ran into the bartender. Raceway Park had 2 bars. Having a bar at a racetrack was not unusual. I remember Hugh Deary, owner of Rockford Speedway, once told me he had a bar with a circular stage for the performers. His point was, he made his money from the bar, and the races, that was the circular stage, were what brought people to his bar. Anyway, as I was leaving, I ran into the bartender. His name was Barry, and as we chatted, I learned he was Pete's son-in-law. After talking for a while, I learned he was familiar with our TV program, Motorsports Unlimited, and somewhere along the line, he asked, how much? I clumsily explained once again it wasn't a charge, it was a donation. Like everyone else, he didn't really understand it or care. He just wanted to know how much. I'm pretty sure it was still a couple of $100 at this point. As I recall, he said, well, what do we do? I think he expected contracts or paperwork or something like that. I told him, well, all you have to do is agree and we'll be here. We do everything with a handshake. We always have. He gave me a date. I asked him if it was going to be a problem if Pete didn't agree. He said I shouldn't worry about it. Raceway Park turned out to be one of my favorite tracks at which to shoot. They had an old stage outside of turns 1 and 2 built for bands at one time. It hadn't been used in years and was half falling down, but it was a perfect shooting platform. We could get the entire track and all of the action from that vantage point. As a tiny one-camera operation, Raceway Park was perfect for us. It wasn't just the ideal shooting platform, though. The people there were terrific to us. When I say people, I mean everyone. The racers, the pit crews, the spectators. Yes, even the spectators. While there weren't that many, certainly not enough to financially sustain the track, they made up for the lack of numbers with enthusiasm. They seemed to know every driver and race team personally and were delighted to see us interview the feature winner in the winner's circle. I was always conscious of the time we were taking up. In effect, we were interrupting the show. The fans at Raceway Park did everything to help us feel comfortable. Yes, I know. It was probably because of our motorsport girls. Certainly the guys enjoyed it when they were out there presenting the trophy. But it wasn't just that. I said before, the fans seemed to know all the race teams personally, and that went for us too. They encouraged us to take whatever time we needed to set up our camera and do the winner's interview. After we would finish, they indicated they couldn't wait to see it on TV. They really liked their drivers, and they seemed to like us for putting them on television. Speaking of drivers, I once mentioned I could do a better job presenting the drivers to our audience if I had more time to work with them. They all volunteered to come to the track 2 hours early so we could pose the teams in the infield with the Raceway Park signs in the background. I was amazed at the effort these teams went through to help us. Mind you, I'm talking about the top late model stars. I've often said I can only do as good a show as you'll let me. The Raceway Park racers proved my point. I was really proud of the work we did there, and it was all thanks to the Raceway Park people, drivers, pit crews, spectators, and, of course, the ultra-cooperative track officials. It was always a pleasure to go there. Unfortunately, the budget was tight, and our productions at Raceway Park were far fewer than I would have liked. The track closed in 2000. I really miss it. And the people.
It's the late model feature, the main event. 10 first-class late models ready to go as the starter looks them over there. Off, and it's Peggy O'Donnell in the yellow number 72 car, taking off into the early lead. Okay, I'm just kidding. That's Robin Marigold, the rifle driver, trying to hold off a charge from number 18, Kirk Harden. Kirk won the trophy dash and the first heat earlier in the evening. Oh, Robin got muscle to the outside, and the freight train is coming through on the bottom, led by number 18, Kirk Harden, with a hot pursuing Zero car. That Zero car is Kevin Reedy. That's Kevin Reedy in the Zero car, doing a little muscling of his own, and he's muscling by Kirk Harden, the trophy dash winner and the winner of the first heat race. Let's see if number 18, Kirk Harden, can get him back. It looks like he got a little bit of a run on him there, but it's not going to happen. As I understand it, the story on Kevin Reedy is he's won a lot of main events this year, but has been missing in action for a couple of months. If that's the case, he sure doesn't seem to be showing any signs of rust, and at this point seems to have firmly taken the lead. Meanwhile, our current late model point leader, number 42, Gary Reaven, is working hard to get by number 77, Mike Turkle, currently second in the point standing. Gary can't afford to spend a lot of time here working past 77 because that Zero car is getting away little by little, and I'm sure that Gary Reaven can see it from his vantage point. On the other hand, I'm sure that Mike Turkle and Kirk Harden aren't the least bit concerned about Gary's problem of getting up front. They're worried about the Zero car getting away from them, and he does appear to be getting away from them. He looks like he's got a good 5-6 car length lead, and the further he gets away, the tougher it's going to be for these guys to catch up because these guys are racing each other. And there, it looks like Kirk Harden was muscled to the outside. Yes, that's exactly what happened. The number 77 car, second to point standing, is now running second in the race with the point leader right behind him, trying to figure out a way to get by. This isn't going to be easy. These guys are all really, really fast, and somehow Gary Raven's got to find a way past Mike Turkle because, again, that Zero car is getting further and further away, and he can't wait long or he's not going to be able to catch him at all. Gary's taking a look on the inside, but doesn't seem to be able to make any headway on him. By the way, this new surface really works. These cars are alive. And now Gary's taking another look on the inside. Is he going to be able to make it work this time? Oh, now this is going to be okay, we tried real hard.
That's it. We're out of time for this week with only enough left to thank John Platania for helping me in the studio putting these explanation shows together. We'll pick up on this discussion next time. I'm Bill Wildt, thanking you for watching and giving this issue some thought.
This program made possible in part by support from ABC Auto Parts, located on Ashland Avenue at 138th Street in Blue Island, Illinois.
Motorsports Unlimited is produced by Bill Wildt, president of the Motorsport Advancement Crusade.
This program made possible in part by support from Jimmy's Red Hots, located on Grant Avenue and Pulaski Road in Chicago.
Motorsports Unlimited was created to raise public consciousness, understanding, and appreciation of the motorsport community and their activities. You can contact us by email at msutv.com or email us directly at msutv@aol.com. We enjoy hearing from our audience and encourage you to let us know what you think. Now, this is not one of our usual next weeks promoting next week's program. This is a reminder that Motorsports Unlimited is now global on YouTube. Simply subscribe to Bill Wildt Motorsports Unlimited on YouTube and watch us anytime.
So that's it, another edition of Motorsports Unlimited and the lovely ladies of motorsports. And be with us next week because we'll have something real exciting. Bill Wildt's going to have the lovely ladies, and just about anything can happen right here on Motorsports Unlimited. Every week at this time, we bring you the best in motorsports. So be seeing ya. Bye-bye. And keep on rocking.